So as we continue our pension maximization training that we started the conversation with a little bit last week, one of the challenges I gave to you guys was to spend the past week on your own doing some research on YouTube, on the World Wide Web, and see what you come across in terms of pension maximization or pension planning. And my first question to you guys is, who did that, and who would like to volunteer anything that they uncovered? Did anybody do it?
I didn't watch the recording from last week because I was on a plane and it's just been a busy week, so strike one. But what I didn't share earlier is that I got about $3 million of new identified money to talk to you about. So we got
Oh, and so I assume that's a no. Nobody did any pension max training. So guys, here's where we're at. Frankly, I can't do this for you. Okay. I just can't. And you know, there's only one way. I'm gonna get back to something Alec, I think, said in our last training, but if he didn't say it on training, it was a conversation he and I had. But essentially the gist of it is I bet we've done and I'll put Alec on the spot here a little bit or talk about him. But I bet Alec has had a dozen pension max trainings in his career between group trainings like this. We did a case together years ago that I kind of did for him. We've had one-on-one conversations. I've helped him with a couple of things. So that's probably about right, or it's close enough. And he finally, in the last week, when he's got a case he's working on actively that had kind of led to this training a little bit, says, well, I finally it clicked. I finally get it. And I don't think Alec has just somehow gotten smarter in the last 6 months. I don't think he's changed as a person. We're all slowly evolving, but we're all generally who we were a year ago or 2 years ago. I think what's different is Alec has more at stake now. I think he's more serious about the business. But more specifically, he's got the combination of a real life case where he's really putting his own work into it and not just kind of sitting there observing me. And then we're layering the conceptual education. And then I think that's the combination where it just clicks. And so to give you guys a parallel, this is why passing securities exams is tough. Because when you're studying for a securities exam, you're trying to memorize information. And you're trying to memorize, and I'm just going to make this up, but okay, the Securities Act of 1913 says this, but the Securities Act of 1918 said that. Again, it's not relevant to real life, but we got to know this stuff. You're trying to memorize how a bond is priced. But absent understanding the concept, it's really hard for that to sink into your brain and retain that. And so it's a little bit of a roll of the dice. Maybe I get the right bank of questions that line up with my practice exams and there's enough overlap where I cross the line. But if you're trying to memorize information, but we don't really grasp the concept, you're going to find two things really, really hard. Number one, you're going to find it really hard to really kind of understand and remember kind of the overall layout and what we're doing. But number two, you're going to find it almost impossible to explain it to somebody else. So Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. And it's just such a poignant quote. And when I think last week, as I was reviewing last week's training just a little bit, just to remind myself for exactly where we left off, and I gave you guys all the example of okay, if somebody inherits a lake house and so they have this asset, and it's a fully owned asset, so there's no insurance required, and you want to keep it in the family and make sure it's protected, wouldn't it be crazy not to voluntarily choose to pay for homeowners insurance on that property, so that if your asset ever burned down or flood or whatever, your asset doesn't just wither away? And I think everybody gets that concept. But how quickly did that help you Did that help you, conceptualize, okay, this pension is kind of like a lake house. It's my asset, it's fully there. I don't owe anything on it. In fact, it's owed something to me. However, it's only good as long as I'm alive, right? And so unless I have some sort of insurance that's protecting the continuation of the value of that asset when I die, then I'm leaving my family in a vulnerable position. You know, that's an example of, I think you got to just understand what we're doing in order to explain it simply. And so my goal here today isn't to make you guys feel bad, but I'm just going to make a general statement. I often get comments from really all of you in some form or fashion, side conversations, text messages, you name it, in person, on the phone, of like, I wish we had more training about this. I wish we had more training about that. When are we going to talk about this? And I just, guys, if we're just not going to grow in our faith if we only think about our relationship with God for 1 hour on Sunday mornings at church, right? We're just not going to learn if all we do is tune into this training, hoping to be fed something that's going to like turn the light bulb on. You guys have to put the work in, and that's, otherwise this just isn't going to happen. And so a lot of you have told me things over the past of like, wow, I wish I understood things like you did. I'll never know it like that. I wish I could be as smooth as and I'm just telling you guys, I'm very intentional about building and maintaining a knowledge base. I pay attention to markets. I personally have a lot of money at stake in markets, right? I'm kind of the point I just made it with Alec. When you got your own skin in the game, it's a lot more interesting to pay attention to, right? Let me tell you what I don't pay attention to. I don't really do fantasy football. I mean, I casually know like who the top teams are in the NFL. I'll casually watch parts of games here or there, but I couldn't tell you for $8 billion like 5 starters in any one team. Like it's just not important to me, right? And so I don't put the work in to stay relevant in that because it frankly doesn't do anything for my life. Now that's just me, but I'm trying to give you guys a parallel that you gotta build a knowledge base. And I just can't even tell you guys how many times I get into YouTube and I get it on the internet because I get interested in things. And what does this person say about that? And what does that person say about this? And it's just, guys, this is where it's at. Okay. So you got to get in there. You got to do the research. You got to know what are the pros of pension maximization. What are some of the anti guys saying, and why are they saying it? And then you got to do some critical thinking. And usually, what you'll find is that a lot of people that are anti pension maximization are people that are just anti permanent life insurance. So they've just kind of built this absolute frame of reference that like anything that's cash value is like inherently bad. I mean, there's some people that think that any kind of annuities are inherently bad, but usually those are the people that want to sell you investment advisory relationships, right? And so you got to learn how to have a critical thinking filter on information. Otherwise, you're going to be very swayed by either objections you get from people that come in or by something you stumble across or somebody throws up a red flag. Well, what about this? Or my uncle said that, or I talked to my accountant about it and he says this. And you guys, I blow right through those roadblocks because I'm just more prepared than my prospect is. And I know what the talking points are on both sides. And one thing that helps me do is come across very genuine. I think when you're trying to present something and you're just making it sound amazing and you're talking about all the highlights, there's kind of like it sounds a little too good to be true kind of mentality. And one of the keys I use to close business at a high level is I love bringing up the cons to something before my client could even get there. I want to put the cons right on the table. Hey, let me tell you what some people will say about this, or let me tell you concerns I've heard in the past, or misconceptions I've heard in the past, or hey, I love the benefit we just talked about, but it's, if I'm talking about a RILA, I'm going to talk about, hey, this is incredible, but it's not the perfect investment because let me show you one negative is we don't get dividends. And usually people are like, oh, okay, makes sense. And it's like instant credibility. So I'll get off my soapbox, but you guys, I can't do it for you. I can't. And I will, I do need to say one more thing as I'm getting into my nationwide, because I want to get into illustrations here. Is let me give you a simple math equation. Okay. So I'm doing this on the fly, but I'm just going to make something up. My income is at it's a bit over this, but it's 800,000. Okay. So let me tell you how it works. If you work 10% as hard as me and you have 10% of my knowledge, in my opinion, that does not equate to 10% of my income. I only know that because I tried that. I remember first thinking, I mean, one of my first organic thoughts in this business, and I'll use round numbers, but I'm like, okay, if Bryce Peterson's making $1 million a year, and gosh, even if I just did 1% of Bryce, that's $10,000, which that was a huge sum of money to me as a college student when I like first joined the business. So like, wow, if I had $10,000, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. But my mistake is thinking this like linear dispersion of results. This idea of, wow, if I do 50% of somebody that's earning $1 million, that's a $500,000 income. No, 50% of somebody that earns $1 million is probably a $50,000 income. It's because it's the elite is that it's that final 10 to 20%, broad range here. In some cases, it's that final 3 to 5%. Yes, we were at the pro tennis tournament, and the worst guy in that tournament is an out of this world, top 100 in the world player. It's just from a tennis standpoint, it's outrageous what these guys can do. But the difference between like number 80 in the world, they're sweating week by week trying to survive, watching every single expense, living out of suitcases, budget flights, right? And that extra 5%, it makes you a top 10 player. You're a global multimillionaire flying private everywhere, first class, everything. It's just you're playing in stadiums versus the outer courts with 100 people watching. I mean, guys, it's that last 3 to 5%. That's the difference. So what's that 3 to 5% in your business right now? We won't even talk about 20%. Hey, what if you did 5% more this week or last week? For some of you, that's what if 5% more hours work like? That's probably another hour of focused work. What if that entire 5% of focused work was more calls? What if you did one more meeting, one more new prospect? What if you just said, you know what, I'm going to spend an hour and I'm just going to get on YouTube and start getting on videos on Pension Max. I'm going to get on videos about RILAs. What did the competition say about this? Because you hear from us how great they are. I guarantee you there's videos about, well, you got renewal rate risk, or you got this, or you should do a fixed index annuity, or I mean, start building that knowledge base. So you guys, I'm just telling you, that's the only path here. It just is. So that said, where we left off with Pension Max is we talked about valuing somebody's pension. So I'm not going to redo all of that. Obviously, we recorded and posted that video. But in our example that we did with Alec, I think we talked about his pension was, we were taking the income payment and we did like an 8% discount rate, and that gets you to the value of the pension. So for today, I'm just going to make up a number and say the pension max, valuation is 500,000. But again, we could dial that in, or you can go back and review that video. But I want to go through and build an illustration real quick with you. And so I just log into Nationwide. All of you guys should have this access or could get this access. So if I click this Illustrator tool here, and I'm going to launch on the web. One of the reasons, and I talked to Steve Gutke about this last week, he asked, should I just kind of start with Nationwide, or should I work with a bunch of different carriers? And, I said Nationwide's the best place to start, in my opinion. That's not a statement of fact. That's a statement of opinion, because they have, in my opinion, the best VUL that we have access to, and probably in the industry. Their IUL is as competitive as anybody, but there's some different lanes that different IULs compete in. So that's not a definitive statement, but it's a top tier IUL. Their term is is top tier. It's very competitively priced. It has a living benefit built in, and it gives you that extra ability to then do a conversion to a permanent plan. And so you could really kind of get into one ecosystem, and you could deliver top tier solutions in term, IUL, and VUL, not to mention survivorship policies and different things. And so I just think that's the best ecosystem to start with. And so I'm going to kind of do this on the fly. And so what I want to show you guys today is an IUL, since everybody's licensed for that. But everything I'm going to cover, and I'll even show you how easy the pivot is, could be done on a VUL. Because again, the only difference is we're just swapping out engines, right? So a VUL is going to have a higher growth rate and all that. So if I go in here, I'm going to start with product and concept, and I'm going to use the indexed UL accumulator 2020. I wouldn't put my worst enemy in the New Heights accumulator. And by the way, as a sidebar, Zach Foster, wholesaler, reached out to me this morning, and he wants to come up in September and do some training and do a dinner or do something like that. So stay tuned for that. So I'm going to select that. And then the state doesn't matter. I'm going to do pension max is this client's name. And let's just say the guy's, I will pick an age, 48 years old. We'll do preferred non-tobacco as a rate class. I always illustrate that. I'm going to go to face amount, and let's just say we've developed our need as $500,000. Now I'm going to do I'm going to do an increasing death benefit almost all of the time. And the reason for this is, number one, it's going to give some cost of living adjustment to this pension that we're valuing, because the pension that we're replacing will otherwise have a cost of living, factor to it, most likely. But number two, it's going to make sure that my client's beneficiary is going to get all of the cash value plus the death benefit at death. Now, once we get down the road in this illustration, we'll talk about optimizing a policy in a little bit, but for now, we're just going to start it with increasing. And then I'm going to go in here under schedule premium, and I'm going, actually right at this point, before I change anything, I am going to click monthly, but I'm going to click calculate at this stage, because I just want to kind of see, where does this policy price out? What am I up against here? And so if you look down at the bottom left kind of corner here, you're going to see all of our guideline values. Death benefit, you're going to have target premium, which is what you're getting paid on, but that's also a value number that I think is basically the goal amount that you should put into a policy. Now, there's a little caveat to that in some pension max cases that we'll talk about. But if you look at this minimum premium, it's down here at the bottom, $241 a month. So that's not what I'd recommend. That's never what I'd put into a policy like this. But one thing I like about Nationwide is, because their fees are very low, their minimums are very low relative to other carriers. I guarantee that's lower than other carriers that we would have access to, in terms of how little you need to put in to get a certain amount of death benefit. And then we're probably, on a pension max case, probably not going to overfund the policy, although in some scenarios we might. And so that gets to, I'm going to keep this very simple today, but then, we can kind of play with the policy once we have the actual pension max calculation figured out. But just so you know, in terms of general training, this guideline annual premium, without messing with 7 pays and all that, this would be the most you could put in. So 33,600. So that's like what, 30, or 2750 a month, something like that. So you got a wide range here, 241 a month to 2750 a month. But the goal would be around a target premium of 1,000. And so I'm going to go back in here now. I'm going to pop back over to case design. And I'm going to just go in here under solve. I'm going to click this little calendar box, and I'm going to put in 1,000 for $1,000 a month. And let's just see if we can pay this through age, 70. Let's just start with that, just as a guess. And you can see there's a little trial and error here. So now we're going to go to interest rate and income. And I'm going to use that multi-year index. Of course, we can get into some deeper dive product training on Nationwide, which isn't the goal today. But, you could play around in real life with the high cap index and all that kind of stuff. But in the S&P 500, but the 1-year multi-index, it illustrates at 6.45%. So on a VUL, I'd probably illustrate at 8% because we're going to use sub accounts, and that's an inherent advantage. So if I'm securities licensed, or if it's my own client, or we're with a rep securities license, I'm going to do the VUL because the VUL I can turn into an IUL, or I can blend the two strategies together. It's just a lot more versatile. But here for today, we're going to do the IUL. And then riders, I'm not going to mess with for right now. Again, if I'm doing pension max, I'm not going to do long-term care rider. In fact, I'm probably not going to do much of that anyways. And go to output design here. And on output design, you're going to have a 100-page illustration if you checked all of this. But the one option I want to check is this annual cost summary. Back to this idea of sharing cons or negatives with people. I lead with the cost of the policy, and I lead with the fees. I don't say, like a car salesman wants to get to the price at the very end after he's already sold you on how amazing the car is, and it just feels kind of sinister. I want to lead with that. And I want to say, hey, I'm not even going to talk about all the benefits here. I just want you to understand right now there is a cost to this. And again, just from a sales standpoint, that really helps with transparency. So now I'm going to go to calculate again. And that's going to bring up the illustration, and it's going to go right to this non-guaranteed tab. So you've got kind of bookmarks over here where you can jump to different things. So as I scroll down here, here's what I'm looking for. And I wonder if I can do this a little smaller so we can see everything on one screen. So all right. Where are we at? So we got 12,000 a year of premium and death benefit over here. So just so we're all on the same page, let's say 5 years in, we put 60,000 of premium. Well, you're going to have some costs and fees coming out. Plus, you're not going to have a whole lot of interest credits the first couple years of the policy, which we're going to show that in more detail in a moment. So we've got 47,000 of accumulated value at the or I'm saying 49,000 over here, assumed interest at the end of 5 years. So we put 60 in, it's worth 49. Usually you're going to find an 8 to a 10-year break even, sometimes 12, on when you have more cash value than premiums you put in. You can see in this example, it's right at 11. 11 years in, I put 132,000 in. Cash value is 132,381. On a VUL, it's going to be a little sooner than that. But I say that range of 8 to 12 because it depends on what age your client is when they start, but it really depends on how much premium you're putting in. And of course, it'll depend on what kind of interest we actually earn. But in an IUL, it's a bit more predictable. And but remember, this cash value accumulation is really only valuable for two reasons. Okay. So let me pause here. We'll do a little quiz. What would be the two very specific reasons that cash value is important on an IUL that's purely done for pension max?
Wouldn't you use it to fund the annuity for the survivor?
What do you mean by that, Steve?
I mean, when we were talking last week, we looked at two different pensions, one which was single life and one which was joint. And so we were talking about taking the higher single life payout from that pension, and then taking that higher payout, but then using some of that higher income from the single life pension and using it to purchase this, with the idea that this IUL would effectively, come the death benefit if the main pensioner, the main person covered by the pension, were to pass, then this death benefit then becomes, basically the funding mechanism for an annuity, right?
So that's actually a really good explanation of pension max in general. And it's not one of the two things I'm going to talk about right now, but what I will tell you is you're hitting at the right track, because ultimately it's this death benefit over here that the beneficiary would get. They would reinvest that into an annuity, or maybe it's a managed account or some other instrument to replicate that lost pension. So the cash value would be a small component of that on an increasing death benefit, because they're going to get the 500,000 plus this one. Let's say they die 10 years in, there's 114,858. So the death benefit would be 114,858. So you're right to a point. The cash value on an increasing policy will enhance that death benefit. But more specifically, before we get to the value of the death benefit, why is cash value accumulation? What are the two most significant things of importance about that in pension maximization?
If I'm following your train of thought here, if the spouse passes away and the pensioner wants to cancel this and take their money and run, that's the money that they would have access to. Is that what you're
Bingo.
asking?
Absolutely one of the two. Yep. You guys follow that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. What would the second reason be? And I'll give you a hint. The second reason involves when both spouses are still living.
Both spouses live and
Liquidity.
What, Ryan?
if both spouses live and you chose the survivorship and the pension, it would all be a sunk cost.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning the payments towards the survivor benefit plan. Again, if you're looking at the alternative.
No, I'm not looking at alternative. What I'm saying is we've already made the decision. We've wrote the policy.
Okay.
I mean, 15 years later, let's look at year 215. So let me set this up a little bit differently. So yeah, we've chosen the single life annuity. This policy is in place. So
Are you just talking about anything from an income perspective?
well, so there's a couple things. What I was getting at was the more cash we accumulate means, because the holy grail of pension max, the sweet spot that you want to get to is if you've chosen that single life annuity, so you've got the max monthly benefit from that pension system you can possibly get, and then you get your policy to a point where it's paid up, so that
Self-funding.
you no longer, it's self-funded, so you no longer have to put this 12,000 a year into it. So where I was getting at, and now we could come up with more than two reasons, but two biggies would be what Alex said. Number one, this is what the pensioner gets if the survivor spouse dies first. That's one of the whole reasons we're doing this, is like, yeah, you can walk away with this 200 grand or choose to keep the policy for your kids, but either way, you're in the driver's seat of that money. But the more cash value growth we experience and or the more return we get, the quicker they can stop paying premiums because the policy becomes self-funded. Okay. And so one of the classic positions I present to prospects is, hey, we can approach this policy in lots of different ways. We can and I'll just say it exactly like this. Some of my clients want to put as much money in as they possibly can in the early years so that they can just get done paying for it, and then they have their full pension plus this paid up policy cooking over here. Other of my clients maybe don't have the cash flow for that, or just would rather use cash for other things. And they'll look at this and say, well, I'd be giving up that survivorship amount every month for the rest of my life anyway, so I might as well just do it within the policy and build up the cash value slower. And usually when I present that to my prospect, they can kind of get, okay, I can see how I've got some latitude and flexibility here. Because what I'm looking for here is, I just assumed we stopped premiums at age 70. I just made that up just to kind of see if this thing's viable, and it is. So here we are at 22 years into the policy. We've got 409,000 of accumulated value, $500,000 of death benefit, and this policy is running all the way until age 120. Okay. So what that tells me right there is I could now go back in and I could, let me go back up here. I could do one of two things. I could either take some years off of this, and or I could put less money into it. So we could play with both of those variables, right? Because again, our primary goal here isn't cash accumulation. it's death benefit acquisition. That's the primary goal. But the cash value accumulation is relevant because that's going to help us stop premiums here. Okay. Now, before I do that, what I want to do though is I'm going to show you one other thing. Is you can see if we just kind of eyeball this, that we're growing cash value by $20,000-$30,000 a year here. As we get into the later years, we're kind of maintaining the same thing. It starts getting a little thinner here. At age 92, we kind of crest at 983,000, and then we start losing a little bit, and we start going down a little bit. So what's happening under the hood here is that those mortality charges are starting to get really expensive, and it's eating up all of our policy earnings. So before I go through and play with anything else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to this annual cost summary. And now it's going to pull up all those annual costs. Okay. And so it's worth running through this real briefly. So all life insurance companies pay essentially a sales tax on premiums that they collect. And so they all pass that on. It is a premium expense charge. They all call it something different, but that's essentially what it is. And when I explain it that way, clients are like, okay, that makes sense. And then I also will say, and by the way, all insurance policies in America are structured this way. So, your homeowner's insurance, your car insurance, all of that, they're paying premium tax charges on what they collect. It's a huge source of revenue for states. But because your car insurance and your homeowner's insurance and your jewelry insurance and all this stuff, none of that is a security. They don't have to disclose to you, okay, of your $87 a month premium, $6 goes here and $12 goes there. And when I explain it just like that, clients are like, yeah, makes sense. Okay. And so it's just such an easy way of just getting right through that fee. Okay. And I say, hey, they're going to charge you $10 a month for administrative charge, kind of laugh that off. And then I come back, I say, I'm going to come back to this specified charge here in a second. But then this is the main charge I want to focus on. This is the cost of insurance. And I'll just show them. I said, what I love about policies like this is that they're going to only charge you for the cost of insurance for the risk that they're on the hook for that year. And so this is pure cost. There's no profitability. There's no margin built into this. This is raw institutional carrier cost on what it takes. And look how cheap that is, $212 for the year for $500,000. That's way cheaper than the term policy. And you'll see that it's increasing a little bit every year as you get older. Okay. And I'm going to show you how that really increases as you get way older. But one of the reasons they can keep this cost so low is because of this specified charge. So you'll see this flat fee that exists for only the first 10 years of the policy. Some carriers do it for 10 years, some do it for 15. Now, here's where I'm going to take a little time out. What this is primarily to pay your commissions and other distribution costs and wholesalers and underwriting and all of that. Okay. It's also virtually all of their profitability. They have a little bit of profitability on their cash values in terms of how they set those rates. And on the VUL side, it's on sub-account fees. There's a little bit of what's called a 12B1 fee built in there. But they're earning no profit from this cost of insurance. They're earning no real profit from this percent of premium charge. And it'd be hard to argue they're earning much on this $10 administrative fee, for all their customer service. So this is where they're earning all their profitability. Now, the way I explain this to my clients, that's also true. It's just, to be candid, maybe a little less true, but it sounds better. As I say, hey, Nationwide is on the hook for this policy. And so what they want to do is all these carriers have learned that if they can get ahead on charging you for some of the risk, it allows them to charge you less when you're older and more likely to be using the cash value. And that is true. They're basically getting all of the distribution costs and some of the risk out of the way early so that they can keep this policy very lean long term. And when I explain it like that to my clients, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And so we can talk about how I explain a surrender charge separately. I don't want to confuse this conversation, but essentially you have that cost coming out. And so with all of these costs in the early years, that's why we're just not going to have as much accumulated value. We're going to kind of be underwater, so to speak, in the early years of the policy, but eventually do a lot better. Now, if we scroll down here, there's a couple things that you're going to notice. Number one of the things I love about Nationwide, two things I love. Number one, their internal costs here are much less. This cost of insurance column over here, much less than competitive carriers. Now, competitive carriers will charge, a higher cost of insurance, but they might offer slightly higher cap rates on their indexes. But I'm just telling you, clients aren't going to remember whether index cap rate is 8.5 or 9 or 9.5, but they're going to see this cost coming out. And when you do a policy review 4 years in, 8 years in, 10 years in, like that, I'd much rather have a lower cost, lower earning policy than a higher cost, higher earning policy. I mean, that's an easy trade for me. So that's one of the reasons I love Nationwide, but I also love them because they're a mutual company. A mutual company means they're owned by their policyholders. So what Nationwide is doing is they have this conditional credit endorsement. And that's basically saying that if you keep your policy long term, they're going to reward you as a policy holder, owner of the company, a shareholder of the company, so to speak. It's kind of like a dividend. It's a little bit like a whole life dividend, although not exactly. But they're essentially, this is a guaranteed. And on the IUL, I don't really sell the IUL. I forget what it is. I know on the BUL, it's 40 basis points. I don't know if you guys know what it is on the IUL. Maybe it's 25 basis points. But it's basically a guaranteed, endorsement or payment back to you, credit back to you for basically not A, keeping the policy beyond 15 years, but B, putting enough premium in. And if you play around with this illustration, you'll see if I lower the premium enough, I might lose qualification for this. But you can see over time it starts to, I mean, that's real money. I mean, it's $1,000 a year coming back in the policy. But let's look what's happening here. Let's focus on cost of insurance charges. So we went from a few $100s a year to a few $1,000s a year. Okay, now we are into age 70. We're getting into the 80s. Look what happens to this cost of insurance. It starts getting astronomical here, right? And it gets to the point where even though we're earning more compound interest, because we have more cash value earning interest, these costs of insurance is really getting out of hand. Now, why is that? Well, there's two reasons. Number one, it's because the client's getting older. So every year they live, they're by definition 1 year closer to dying. Just kind of the way that works out. So none of us get out of here alive. Number two, though, we are continually purchasing $500,000 of coverage. So if you look over here, here we are at age 88. There's 936,000 of cash value, 1,436,000 in death benefits. So we're purchasing $500,000 of coverage at the rate of, let's call it 35 grand. I would argue when somebody's 88 years old, if you said, hey, would you trade $35,000 this year for an additional $500,000 if you die? I mean, if they're under death benefit, maybe maybe that's a favorable thing, but most people wouldn't want to do that year after year. So I would argue if you already have 900,000 built up, we've completed the plan. We have enough cash value where we're essentially self-insured here. So I would argue we don't need to spend this money for the death benefit. So how do we fix that? Well, if we go back to, let's look at where this really starts getting out of control. I mean, you could argue a lot of different spots here. Let's just say when it crosses 5,000, I'm going to make up a number. I'll round it off. I'll just say age 75. So let's go back in here to case design. And then we go to face amount and premium. And now under death benefit option, I'm going to click this kind of calendar looking box. And I'm going to say, let's do increasing until A75, age 75. And then we're going to switch it to a level death benefit from age 76 to max. Now you're going to see a massive difference here. Now, if we go right back to annual cost summary, look at what happens as cost of insurance. So we still get up, nothing's changed till age 75. But see how we start to plateau here in the 6,000s? And then we get up into the 7,000s. But believe it or not, we start going back down cheaper. I mean, we're talking, we went from $35,000 at age 88 to $2,600. How about that?
Crazy.
Yeah. So now we go over, and what that's going to do, if I did these side by side, and this is where you guys got to just get in there and do this yourself, you know, you get two monitors out or you print one page, however you want to do that, get these things side by side, you're going to find that there's a proportional effect to, our interest earned now is exploding because we have so much less, we have much less water leaking out of the bottom of the hull, right? And so now what's happening is your cash value is going to explode. And eventually you're going to see we have the tiny layer of death benefit. If you're 89 years old, there's 1.18 million of cash value, 1.24 million. So there's only 60,000 in death benefit. Okay. And I guess I could train on this illustration for 5 more hours. I promise you. We could go into the weeds on every little variable we tweak and how do you explain this? And I mean, it's just there's mastery that you want to get to in this product. And then you have such a high level of confidence that you can look to anybody and you can get them on board with this. And I will tell you, I'm making this up, but probably half of the permanent life policies I've sold, the clients were like, yeah, it makes sense. Let's do it. And the other half, I've had to work for it. I've had objections of, well, Dave Ramsey says this, my CPA said that, my father-in-law told me never this, like all of that stuff, right? Or they just can't get it, or it seems like a lot of money, or, well, what if we change our minds in 10 years? All of that, right? You overcome with product mastery. But one of the things I'll tell you is you can get out and I've just torn these illustrations apart over the years. And in most cases, even if let's say the client dies at 90, and let's say there's 60,000 of raw death benefit, okay? Not to mention, by the way, we've turned 264,000 of premium into 1.1 million of cash value, totally tax-free with 0 market risk, largely with money that otherwise would have gone into a pension system. Like, you want to talk about a home run. But there's 60,000 death benefit. Now here's a little trivia question for you guys. Just to have fun with you. Let's just say that 60,000 isn't a life-changing delta at age 90. I mean, what's the difference in getting 1.24 million and getting 1.18 million real? Let's just say there's no difference there in real life. But what would be the significance? What would be the economic value of that $60,000 at age 90? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
In terms of what's the current present value in terms of today's dollars?
No, I'm not thinking about that. But like, what would be the significant purpose of that extra $60,000?
Oh, I got you.
So I've actually had accountants, engineer type people. We've all run into those clients that they've actually taken numbers and put them in their own spreadsheet. They've tried to poke a hole in my idea, right? This sounds too good. Why doesn't everybody do this? All that. And we can talk about the marketing of it, but I've approached it this way with my fee conscious clients. In most cases, what I'll tell you is if you take that $60,000 and we go back and we add up all of the cost of insurance charges that they've paid, and we add up all of the rider charges, you're going to find that in most cases, even that small residual pure death benefit is enough to essentially reimburse the benefactor all of those charges at death. And so what they've really done is they've had a self-completing plan. They've had coverage this entire part of their life. They have a legacy for their family. They've had the versatility of You know, there's things you can put on a spreadsheet, there's things you can't. What's the value of being, um, you know, 74 years old and having $500,000 hanging out in an account that's growing at 6 to 8% a year, zero taxes, and can't lose money that they have full liquidity of? I mean, that's a real valuable asset to have access to, right? So I could approach this from so many different ways, but if we download this on a spreadsheet and we added up every fee they paid in actual numbers, and then in this case, if we also added up, we then subtracted the total of the conditional credit endorsement they've received from Nationwide, I guarantee you that there's no point where that death benefit isn't enough to essentially reimburse the beneficiary for all of those net charges. So you've had a basically risk-free, virtually cost-free, benefit in your family all these years. Now, it's not totally cost-free, and this is where you get into like second derivative conversations, but because you could talk about opportunity costs. I mean, if you put the same $1,000 a month into the S&P 500 and took market risk, you'd probably have 2 million instead of 1.1 million. I mean, so again, there's no definitive answer here, but within the self-contained vacuum of this policy, you could absolutely say that, that's one of the things I love about Nationwide. I love about these policies itself. And then from here, we would dial this in a bunch more, because from here, now that I've gotten this cost of insurance way down, I could, just in the last minute we have to finish up, I could easily go back here now and I could say, okay, I could either pay $1,000 a month until maybe age 60 and see what that looks like. And so it would have given me an error if it failed. So now, hey, you're done at age 60, and we've got enough cash value accumulation here, and we've compressed the insurance charges down the road, that this thing is still building value, forever. And and just to compare, they're showing you this is at that 6.45%. This alternate over here, this middle column, is at 4.25%. So that 2.2% differential, look at the difference. At age 84, you got 467 over here, you got 168. This thing fails at 4% interest. This is one of the reasons why whole life is so terrible. It's just a little bit less interest, a little bit higher fees, and that equates. You got to put way more money into a whole life policy to accumulate to acquire the same level of death benefit. So that would be one variable I could play with. The other variable I could play with is I could say, well, what if we only put $600 a month in instead of 1,000, but maybe we did it until age 70? And I'll tell the client, hey, which would you prefer? Would you prefer $600 a month until age 72? And again, I'd play with it to figure out the numbers. Or would you rather put $1,000 a month until age 60? Or what if you had 27,000 laying around in a CD somewhere? What if we drop that in up front and you got done at age 55? And you can see how you can, once we've identified the death benefit need, then we can come in here and the world is our oyster in terms of playing with different levers to dial in a policy that makes sense for that particular client. And man, you want to talk about value add and financial planning at its highest level. This is the ultimate segue of where asset accumulation and life insurance kind of converge into really financial planning at its highest level. So I love what this concept has done. I mean, I've done this dozens of times in my career. I'll do this dozens and dozens more in my career. And so many ways from here we can go on how we structure a policy, what our goals are. Do we want to on purpose put even more money and accumulate tax-free money that we take out on purpose? I mean, again, you can do all that. So just as we're right at the end of our time, anybody have any questions on what we've covered here today?
Did you say Zach Foss is our contact for things like this?
He is. I think he's yours as well, but I don't know that for a fact, Lisa. I know we share some wholesalers, but not all wholesalers, but I think he's your guy as well. Hey guys, I know I was pretty direct on the, you know, kind of self-training that you need to do. I hope you know that comes from a place of so desperately wanting you guys to win, you know, and listen, I'm not your father, but my whole life right now is being a dad. It's like it's the number one, number two, number three, number four, number five most important thing in my life. And it consumes most of my life. And I know a lot of you can relate to that. And it's like there's so many things I want for my kids, but there's things that I can give them. And there's things I need to give them, right? You know, I mean, the obvious stuff. There's things I can give them. And then there's a whole category of stuff that I cannot give. They got to earn them themselves. They got to go through the hardship themselves. They got to go through the struggle themselves. They got to go through the tough days themselves. And then we can talk about it. And I can help them maybe pull some lessons from it. But I just can't give it to them. I just can't. There's no way of transferring it. And the truth is, I think you guys know what I'm talking about. The stuff that'll mean the most to them, the stuff that they'll really love the most, that they'll value the most, that they'll be most grateful for when they're older, is all of the stuff in that last category. It's all the stuff I can't just give them. And so I'm there to be their guide and help them figure it out and help them look for the right places and go alongside. But I'm constantly pushing them. I'm constantly challenging them. And because I have a responsibility to help them get as much out of their potential as they can, especially when I'm in full control of their lives, which won't be true for much longer for a few of them. And I hope you guys know that that's my heart. That's where I'm at. That's why I'm doing this training. The company doesn't require me to do this. It's not part of my SMD or EMD contract. I couldn't even connect the dots on, you know, the trainings we do lead to X amount of business. I just think they're important. I think they're an important baseline of your, you know, building a knowledge base. But you guys, this is 20% of it, right? 80% of it's going to be the self work that you do. And I just can't do it for you. All I can do is tell you how I've done it. And I've just outworked most people. And that's why I have the rewards that most people don't have. Everybody wants them. Everybody wants to go to Hawaii. Everybody wants to get these huge bonus checks. Everybody wants the freedom. You guys, the company called me yesterday. One of our top home office people, and you know that if you go on my WFG, they're running this BMW championship contest. For whatever reason, they got a couple extra tickets in the suite, and they called me and said, "Hey, your name's on the." You know, we went around to a couple of the department heads, and you know, your name got surfaced, and wanted to call to see if you know you wanted to. We'll fly you down. We'll put you up in a hotel. We'll give you suite access, the whole deal, and you know, I've been on the road the last couple of weekends. I told him thanks, but no thanks. But just to get that call meant something, right? Like, do you want to be on that list? Well, you got to put the work in, you guys. It just doesn't happen. You gotta put the work in. So I hope you guys do it. You don't owe it to me, you owe it to you. So I hope you do it, and we'll chat with y'all next week.
Thanks, Tyson.